What if I told you the artist who created this amazing painting never went to art school? This is Ruth Fitton. She's an award-winning portrait painter and her work is currently on show at the National Portrait Gallery in London. Today, she's going to be painting a portrait from life and she'll be revealing how she became a rising star of the realist art scene without ever going to art school and why you don't need to either. So we first met, I think, in about 2018 after you'd seen some of my YouTube videos.
Yes, that's right.
So what did you find most helpful about them?
I mean, the clue's in the name, really. It's simplify drawing and painting. Is your channel still called the same thing? Yeah. And it was just so demystifying. Like, let's take a palette of 3 colours. Let's not use any medium. This is just from blank canvas to a finished painting. I was watching a lot of your time lapses, I think, which I hadn't, at that point in time, certainly no one else was doing material like that. So it was just literally seeing the logical steps of how to get through a portrait.
And how long had you been painting before that?
About 5 years, I think. I'd just been kind of fumbling around, trying different bits and pieces and not acquiring bits of skills, but not knowing how to put them together.
Yeah.
And yeah, it really showed me just a roadmap of how to actually get moving in the right direction.
And you asked me about teaching, but unfortunately we were in opposite parts of the UK.
Yes.
So I told you about Rosemary Brushes, who had basically just started doing courses with, obviously, lots of very well-known artists use their brushes, and they had just started bringing them over. Do you remember the first one you did?
And the first one I took was with Michelle Dunaway. That was in the summer of 2018. Which was wonderful, just really encouraging and consolidating. It was figure and landscape, I think, so it was some of everything, lots of useful tips in there.
Well, how many artists do you think you've trained with in total, like doing short courses?
I'm guessing 7 or 8, I think.
So how game-changing was it for you to kind of come into contact with other sort of representational artists that were actually sharing their knowledge?
Just to learn from people who were actually successfully doing what I was attempting to do and doing it to a really high level. Honestly, it's been a blessing to be able to learn from people who are so good at what they do. And yes, I think I'm very thankful to have the internet, and in this day and age you can literally learn from the best.
Why didn't you go to art school? So there are places that offer a full-time training in representational art known as atelier schools, where myself included and most representational kind of portrait painters today, a lot of those have been through those schools, and you're one of the few. I suppose everyone thinks you've been to one of those schools but hasn't. Is there a reason why you didn't, and would you say there was a kind of drawback to that kind of education?
There was definitely a point where I really wanted to go and study. When I first started painting, I didn't know the schools existed. No. And then when I discovered they did, quite shortly afterwards, I hankered after going to an atelier. And then I had this experience. It was the first time, I think it was the first time I had a piece in the Mall Galleries, and I was in the Young Artist section of this exhibition. And my painting was hanging on the wall opposite 2 wonderful portraits, very accomplished, and I think one was a 3/4 and one was a side profile. And I went to the exhibition and I thought, I wish I could paint like that person. I was so depressed just looking at this art and looking at mine on the opposite wall and thinking, I need to learn, I need to be able to paint like this person. And then, of course, I went closer and I looked at the labels, and it was 2 different artists. 2 different artists who had been to the same school, and their work was, at least to my eye at that point, indistinguishable. And that was the change for me. It was the turning point away from wanting to go to that kind of school, because I thought, well, I've worked so hard to get this far. I don't want actually to go somewhere where they tell me I have to paint in a certain way, which discards the knowledge I've already accumulated and which produces me at the end of the process as something I'm not, which it might look very similar to a lot of other people.
So what advice would you give to artists who are starting out on their own, who are serious about getting really good at painting?
I honestly think the most important thing is to follow your own path and not to try and replicate what someone else has done. Because we are all very different people. As I said, the atelier system wasn't right for me, and learning on my own was. But that doesn't work for everybody. And for some people, going on to study later in life works. For some people, studying really young works. And you have to do it your own way. Otherwise, if you try and replicate someone else's process, you're just going to end up trying to be a clone of that artist, when really you want to be your own person, your own artist.
You've won many awards, and obviously through finding your own voice and trying to use your imagination. So what for you would make a successful portrait?
A successful portrait has to be an image which has a story, even if it is just a head and shoulders or even just a head. Any image we're looking at kind of implies that it's a frozen moment in time, and for me it's important to create a picture that looks like it has a before and after. If it's a painting that's completely just focused on technique and it's just a model sat there and there's no interest happening, it implies that it's a very static moment, that nothing is happening, there's no story. For me, you have to combine the technique with some directional movement or expression, movement of the eyes. If you can introduce even the smallest bit of conflict, even in just a head study, like the face is one way and the eyes are the other way or something, any question you can introduce makes the painting more interesting.
For today's demo, Ruth will be painting Tatiana, who's appeared in one of my previous videos, so you'll be able to see how Ruth's portrait compares with mine. So how much of a plan do you have before you start a portrait like this?
I have a vague plan. I mean, just from looking at her in this pose, the head and the hair makes a fantastic shape.
Yeah.
The head and the hair and the neck. And I think that is what I'm going to go for in this session. So I'm not going to go for the shoulders. I'm not thinking, the model is in front of me, therefore I will paint the whole of what I see. It's what is the key kind of aesthetically pleasing shape compositionally.
And so you're just going for like the bigger masses with your drawing?
Absolutely. I'm working out I suppose the silhouette of the shape that I want to create on the canvas, more or less. And as soon as I have an idea of what that is going to be, I'm going to go in and mass in a colour for the face and a colour for the hair.
And what was that mixture, that initial flesh colour?
I think it was...
Yeah, transparent oxide red, was that?
It's a burnt sienna, but it's quite similar to a transparent oxide red.
Burnt sienna, white, viridian to cool it down, and a bit of yellow.
It was some ultramarine blue and some sap green.
Okay.
Winsor Newton sap green I find is good for kind of olivey skin tones.
Yeah.
I often take quite a while at the beginning of a session to make sure I've keyed my initial colour exactly to how I want the colour harmony to be. I don't sort of stick down a basic, okay, I always start with this mix, therefore we'll go with that. Yeah, I like to make sure I've got it right. It might mean playing around with it for a little while.
And now, what's that, just a kind of quite a thin layer of blue and brown for the
Yes, more or less. I'm trying to get the value more than the colour at this point. And with all my initial layers, I'm scrubbing the paint thin rather than mixing a lot of solvent with it to get it thin. So I don't end up with a kind of swimmy... Yeah,
all slipping around. Yeah. It's interesting you use quite small brushes at the start.
My thinking is generally use a smaller brush with more paint. I guess I'm still thinking large marks.
So now you've kind of gone for the main shadows of the features.
Yes.
Eye socket, under nose. And you're kind of already thinking about the edges and kind of modelling the edges.
Yes, that's important. But mostly at the moment I'm just trying to make sure I have all the proportions correct. It has to look like a human head before anything else. Yeah.
Well, I mean, really, if you get them placed accurately, you already start to recognise her vaguely.
Yeah.
As if you were seeing her from a distance.
But I see a lot of people going straight in for the details of the shapes of the features and stuff, thinking I need to get the likeness, therefore I'm going to go for the detail from start to finish. And in fact, you need the structure first to hang the little things off.
Yeah, see, I can already recognise her.
I'm just going for grabbing some of the drawing on the shadow side of the face. When there's a fringe involved, you often have to grab the bits of the face you can see when you can see them, and then decide at the end which bits of the hair you're going to place over the top.
So now you're starting to look for, is it more kind of more variation in colour?
Yes.
Some of the stronger colour notes already?
Yes, absolutely. I want to get the impression of the skin around the head, mostly, which involves a lot of colour shifts. So yes, going for the main colour shifts first. Colour and value, I suppose, more than drawing.
Yeah, so you already go for quite a lot of subtle nuance very early on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking for form, so I'm placing the shadows and then tiling out from the shadows into the lights, but I'm thinking colour as well as value as I do that. It's quite simple, really. If you've keyed your base tone correctly enough, it's kind of just with each, you can observe what value you're going for, and then it's just, well, do I need this to be more orange, more pink, more purple, more green? Because you're working into a base which is correct, it kind of merges anyway, so you don't have to be pinpoint precise with your colours because you're kind of mixing on the canvas wet into wet.
It's interesting how already some passages are already very soft and round, like on the cheek. And obviously you're thinking about planes and structure, but you're already getting into some quite refined modelling.
I guess I'm thinking I'm going for a three-dimensional head first and foremost, and there will be some moving around of all of this as I get into the drawing more. I think it comes a little bit from landscape painting, because I've done, not masses, but I do regularly go out landscape painting, and obviously in that scenario what you're battling is changing light all the time. So when you block in a landscape, you're going for those accurate colours more than straight away, and I think maybe that has bled into my portraiture. Weird, I keep feeling like the nose is too long, but my measuring tells me it isn't.
I don't trust measuring.
Yes, the mouth is correct. Maybe when the eyes go in, it'll make more sense.
Yeah, how much detail are you going into the eyes at this stage? Or are you just trying to place them?
As little as I can get away with, getting the shapes correct so that I can build from there into the rest of the face.
So just the main darks, irises, eyeshadow.
Yes, sometimes I wouldn't even make the distinction for the iris at this point, but with Tatiana it's very clear. You couldn't say that the eye is one whole dark shape, whereas someone with blue eyes, it would be more kind of a mid-tone for the whole of the eye at this point. I'm also using a very frayed, scruffy brush for the eyes and the detail at this point, so that there's no possibility of diving in with lots of detail and getting very tight and distracted, because this brush isn't capable of making a tight mark.
Would you say all the edges were soft, just automatically from using that brush? Or?
Yeah, you'd have to load it up and really deliberately twist it and that kind of thing to make a very sharp edge.
Is that a slightly smaller brush, or is it, than the one you're blocking things in?
Yeah, this is...
and they're all the rosemary, like the cheapest ones?
Yes, these are the really cheap ones.
I use them I do use those for like edges and things, because they're rounds.
They are, yes.
Yeah, and like that's what everyone used, but like before the Industrial Revolution, they just had round brushes. So all those edges you see in like Velasquez and...
It's true, yeah, no fan brushes here. I'm going to go in and see if I can build up some lights.
Yeah, I've been waiting for you to put those on for so long. I always try and get them in quite early because I find they add so much form.
They do, yes. Yeah. Sometimes I think it's, with me, if I put them in too early, I get almost tricked into thinking that I've got it all right because it looks so impressive with the highlights in. I find it is much easier with an alla prima to build up light on top of something that's slightly too dark. I find it quite difficult to
darken it.
Darken something, in wet paint. Just the physicality of how the paint sits on itself or doesn't sit on itself.
Yeah. And sort of now you're going for some of those more cooler edges around the eyes.
Yes, I mean I'm essentially just focusing on this cheek and the turn of the form in each direction. and that involves putting in the cooler notes.
And are you underplaying the, the nasolabial fold there, the slight shadow just to the side of the nose? Are you going to kind of keep that quite light?
Yes, I'm going to make it brighter and warmer than I'm seeing it.
Because often it can make people look older, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yes. It's one of the things you have to learn, usually the hard way. And often, no matter how you may think you've downplayed it enough, and you probably haven't. So I'm now I'm starting to use softer brushes so that they will lay the paint down on top of the paint underneath. Whereas if I was continuing to use the bristle brushes, they'd probably be scraping it off more than putting it on.
So how would you say your approach was different based on, like, obviously this is like one session, say if you're working on something for one session, or if it's something you've got longer with a person, or if you're working from photos, would you say your approach was similar to this, or?
Ideally, I would do, if it was a multiple session piece, I would just want to do maybe 2 days in a row while the paint is still wet, so I get maybe a good 11, 12 hours painting wet in wet. And then after that, it's a case of just making small adjustments.
Do you ever, so let's say your kind of longer, your larger paintings, obviously there's a lot more going on in them, but would you find yourself reworking the portraits and stuff?
Yes, sometimes. It's whatever is needed until the painting is how it wants to be. Ideally, you want everything to go right first time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always.
The colour on the neck, that's your original, that's what you masked it in with, isn't it, originally? Is that your original flesh colour?
The neck was originally quite lighter than the face anyway.
Okay, so you really...
but the face has got darker, yes.
Yeah, because it is light, the neck is lighter and cooler, and the colour that it is now kind of looks quite accurate.
Yes.
And I'm trying to remember if your face was that colour as well when you blocked it in.
The face was slightly darker.
But now that you've added the warms, it suddenly appears the right temperature.
I think I'll probably push it darker for compositional reasons. So you don't want the focus going to the neck, you want it going into the face.
Yeah.
But it helps sometimes to put it correct first and then go for the artistic bit later on.
Yeah, so I often admire your hair, not your hair, well, the hair in your paintings. You always do such a good job.
Thank you. I think the main part is deciding, particularly with a hairstyle like this one, where you're going to put the hair, particularly if it's falling over the face. You have to decide where it's going to come over the face and how it's going to work best design-wise. And then you have to go for it because you only get one shot, really.
And have you got any tips for painting hair?
Less is more, definitely. I think it's more important to get the feel of strands than it is to get the values or something completely perfect. So you're relying on the brush itself to create the feeling of soft strands for you, because your brush is made of hair and it's just naturally making that mark. So I think if you go back in and try to correct things or add or whatever, you're just going to destroy the realism in an odd way, even if you're striving for it to be more realistic via more detail. What do you think? Shall I go for this big piece in the middle? I think it's cool. I'm going to do it. So I'm putting in the shadow first, the shadow of the hair.
Yeah, I mean, the hairlines are sometimes the most fun.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to use a slightly smaller brush.
It's like landscape painting again.
Yes.
Because it's not copying, it's
making the image you want to make based off what's in front of you.
As I say, I'm loving the hairline. I'm loving the strands of hair.
I guess the other thing with hair is to know to exaggerate your sharps and your softs.
Again, it's all about edges, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So, when do you decide when a study like this is finished?
Well, the unromantic answer is I usually paint till the end of the session.
Yeah.
And then sometimes there's some touching up afterwards, just going back to it the next day, softening some edges, making sure it's how I want it as a picture. Not to the extent of repainting anything, just literally, usually just softening a few things. Otherwise, it's just, when there's nothing obviously jumping out that you want to do, it's like when you can look at it without thinking, oh, I must just do that. Though that can be a difficult way of doing it because often you do keep seeing things.
Yeah, it's nice just to have the time limit.
It forces you to economise, which I think can be quite good.
Is that the final last few details in the eyes? A few little accents?
Yeah, just checking the positioning of them. You know, the direction of the gaze is really important. You don't want to... It's quite easy if you paint one eye and then the other. If you step back, you realise you've painted the model slightly cross-eyed because they're not looking at exactly the same point the whole time. So it's important to just step away from what you think you're actually looking at and make sure that the painting makes sense. And then, yes, just final touches. Try to remember to double check everything.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That's an absolutely fantastic portrait. And you can watch this video next if you'd like to see how much better Ruth's version of Tatiana is compared to mine.